Welcome back to Music 239, Intro to World Music. I just love doing that. Anybody tell me what this is? A gong. How many people say it's a gong? How many people say it's not a gong? It's a trick question. Somebody says it's not a gong. What is it? It is a tamtam. That is correct. It is a tamtam. This is a gong. Or at least, I'm going to tell you it's a gong for the moment. It'll pass for a gong. Later we're going to find out that this, in fact, is not a gong in another context. But in our context, in an American orchestral context, this is a gong in my right hand. In my left hand, this is a tamtam. It actually comes originally from China. A gong comes originally from Indonesia, which is the culture that we're going to be studying next. As you look at these, what is the difference between the two besides their size? Yes?
Globe in the middle of the phone.
Right. There's a knob in the center of this gong, and there is not a knob in the center of this one. This tam-tam is flat, and so when it's played, you don't hear a particular pitch center going on. In fact, there are many, many different tones that are sounding here, all blending together, and you can't pick out one over another and say, oh yes, I hear a G, for example. Because in fact, there are lots of tones, and that's because there's no knob in the center to give it its sense of pitch. But if I play this instrument, you get a much more defined sense of pitch. Everybody sing the pitch that defines this instrument. Ah, you're right. Let's see if we can find out what pitch that is. It's close to F sharp, but is it F sharp? Is it a G? No. It's roughly halfway in between an F sharp and a G. What does that tell you about this instrument? It is a non-Western sense of pitch. Exactly. And we've seen that before in some of the other cultures in this class. Indonesia is going to be the king of the non-Western pitch units in this course because their entire system is based on a sense of pitch that is outside the 12-tone realm that we deal with in the West. And it's got a great sound to it, too. I just love the sound of this particular instrument. I've stopped calling it a gong because as we start to study Indonesian music, and particularly the music of Java and Bali, we will find that this is actually a katuk. Okay? This instrument is actually a particular type of gong called a katuk. The word gong, which originated in Indonesia, by the way, as did the word ketchup and amok, according to your text. The word gong actually refers only to the largest hanging gongs like this. Okay, and so this instrument is actually the smallest type of hanging gong, and it's called a katuk. We'll see that as we start to study this music. And so we move to the music of Indonesia. We go back to Asia after studying music of Eastern Europe. And there's a reason for that that will become apparent in time. The other instrument that I want to show you is called a suling. It's a Javanese flute, and it only has 4 holes It's a 4-hole instrument. It is end blown, which means that you play in the top. And it overblows at the octave, which means you can play an upper octave if you blow harder. The little piece of bamboo coming down here over the top is just decorative, really. But what it does do is to finish out the edge of the hole on the very top of the instrument to allow it to have a cavity in which you can then play to create the wind going through at the right angle. It's also the instrument that's featured on your PowerPoint at the beginning of the presentation on the title page. So I thought I would introduce it to you. The terms and ideas that you need to know regarding this unit are, first and foremost, gamelan. Gamelan. We will study gamelan very significantly. Then tuning and scales, particularly the Slendro and Pelog scales of this style, and how they differ from a Western 12-tone scale. A gunding, it actually is a very musical sounding term. Gunding, it actually means a composition for gamelan. And we will be seeing quite a few gundings as we study music of this style. The loud and soft playing styles of gamelan music, and then the differences between the music in Java and the music in Bali, which are 2 different islands in Indonesia. So that's going to be our focus during this unit of the course. Anybody like to play the tam-tam? I'll pass it around. No? How about the gong? That's a little more manageable. There you go. We'll pass that around. People can play it. And I have you pass that around because I like the sound of it so much that I like hearing it over and over again.
So the Gong show, was that actually a tam-tam?
Yeah, the Gong show was not played on a gong. It was on a tam-tam. Say that again?
They had this whole expose on China, and they called it a gong.
The Muppets did not do quite as much research as they should have. The term Chinese gong is actually a misnomer. Chinese actually have a tam-tam. And the word gong comes from Indonesia and refers specifically to one of these. There are also gongs made in Turkey that have knobs on them as well, and the whole idea of a pitched gong works that way. The opera gong that we saw in China doesn't actually have that name in China. This is a translation. So when you say opera gong being used in Peking opera like we studied in China, that's actually a misnomer. It really should be more of a tam-tam, except that, remember that the opera gong changed pitch. So it was partially a knobbed instrument, and that's why gong might be somewhat appropriate there. I'm going to bring the opera gong back in and take a look at it, because in the context of our discussion today regarding the difference between a gong and a tam-tam, you have to look at the opera gong or tam-tam with different eyes at this point. I'll bring that in and we'll explore that a little bit more.
So is it the knob or the curvature at the back end that makes it a gong?
It's the knob. Yeah, the knob makes it a gong.
So if we had a tam-tam and just made a knob into it, then it would be a gong.
You might be able to do it, but you would have to reforge the instrument to actually retrofit a knob onto a tam-tam. You would have to reforge the instrument to make that happen. Yes?
Also, the tam-tam seemed to have like more resonance, like the pitch stayed longer.
Yeah, it did.
Is it just because of the shape?
It's because it vibrates longer. I mean, there's nothing to stop the vibration like there is with this gong that has, because of the knob and because of the curvature, the vibration stops a little sooner. Yes, you do. Yeah. You get different sounds if you hit the gong in different places. Yes?
How would you get different notes? Like would the knob be bigger or smaller?
How would you get different notes? You make a larger instrument. Yeah, you make a larger instrument, and you bend the metal in different ways to tune it exactly like you want. Your book has a description, a lengthy description of gamelan gong construction.
Jeez, there goes my ears.
Yeah. Your book has a lengthy description of gamelan gong construction that turns out to be a fairly religiously oriented event, and we'll talk about that as we get into this particular style.
So the knob of the gong is always the same proportion to the rest of the...
I wouldn't want to say that for sure. The proportion of the size of the knob to the rest of the gong, I wouldn't say it's always the same proportion. I think it depends on what type of gong it is, what type of instrument, and as we'll see, there are many, many different types of gong-like instruments in this style, and they're all designed a little differently. Okay. Yeah, I made a mistake by passing that around, but that's okay. Everybody needs to get hands-on experience with gamelan. Now, in Southeast Asia and the South Pacific, there are many other music cultures other than gamelan that we're not going to have time to study. One of them is Australia, and probably the most famous instrument there, the didgeridoo. We will have a demonstration of that you will be seeing a little later in this course. So we will have a didgeridoo demonstration, not today, but eventually. So hold out for that. There are also thriving music cultures in the other countries, such as Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and there are instruments that are very common to all of the Asian cultures that we've studied that you will find going back and forth between these different music cultures. In Indonesia, though, we're going to focus on Java and Bali. Be aware that there is gamelan in other countries in Indonesia. Malaysia, for example, has a thriving gamelan culture as well. Our book, though, focuses on these two. You can see in the map on your book, you can see where Indonesia is. It used to be called the Dutch East Indies until the Dutch got kicked out after World War II through revolutionary forces. And there are very old cultural traditions here. The boundaries of what is now called Indonesia were founded as a result of European colonization. So before the colonial period, they were not necessarily considered as a collected unit. But because of colonialization and after that, they started developing a national language of Indonesia. And that language is still not the first language that any of the people learned that lived there. They would first learn Javanese, and then they would learn the Indonesian national language after that. But every culture has its own individual language, and so they are united, and yet they are divided in the same way. Okay, now, on one of the maps that you have on your PowerPoint, you look at Indonesia and you see Java and Bali there, and they look like they're connected. They look like they are part of the same island. But when we see a larger view of this, you'll see that they are actually not exactly connected, and there is a strait of water that goes in between the two islands. And their cultures, as a result, are similar, and yet there are some important differences as well. But you can see that it is south of Vietnam and Thailand, Cambodia, Singapore is in that general area. The whole area then north of Australia and slightly west. A lot of people here. Okay, Java has 9 million people, larger population than New York City. There are extremely wealthy people and there are some extremely poor people as well, as in many third world nations. So, very densely populated area. Okay. Java has 2 major cities that are both considered capital cities both for commerce purposes and also for the arts. One of them is Jakarta, which is up at the top of your map, and then down at the bottom, Yogyakarta, down at the bottom, are both major cities for culture. Okay, the largest ethnic group on the island is Javanese, but that's only about 2/3. So a number of Sudanese people have immigrated there as well. Religious practices are pretty interesting in that a lot of the population is Muslim. In fact, one of the largest populations of Islamic people is in Indonesia. But in Java, there's this sort of strange mix of Hinduism and Buddhism that is tied in with the island's traditional ancestor worship. And so none of the traditional religions that are there, Buddhism, Hinduism, or Islam, are fundamentalist. They tend to be more of a combination of the island's previous ancestor worship, and then they've taken elements from the world religions and sort of morphed them in with their own beliefs. This is important where it comes to gamelan because the construction of gamelans are very religiously oriented. There are pictures of gamelans that you will find on the website. You might take a look at those. They are very ceremonial in nature and very formal, some of the pictures of these instruments. Yes?
So are the gamelans just made up of gongs?
There are gongs, but there are other instruments as well, and we're gonna see that here in just a minute. So the question is, are gamelans made up just of gongs? No, in fact, there are many other instruments involved. It just happens that the gong is the instrument that I happen to have to demonstrate to you. But it is also made up of instruments that sit on tables. There are 2 types of gongs. There are hanging gongs, and then there are gongs that sit like kettles. They look like kettles that sit on tables, and they tend to be played with hammers, generally two hammers per gong, whereas the hanging ones are more 1 hammer per gong. They're played, I say hammer, but it's actually more of a mallet. It's a padded mallet similar to the one that we used to play the gong here in class. But there are also what are known as metal slab instruments. They look like xylophones. You could, or better yet, vibraphones. Okay, metal slabs of metal that are struck with hammers to produce tones. There are also use of a drum. There is usually 1 drum with every gamelan. There is usually a 2-string fiddle called a rebab, and there is a suling, which is the flute. There may be more than 1 of these. So there may be 1 or more rebab players, which is the 2-string fiddle. Where have we seen a 2-string fiddle before? The erhu in China. Right. So clearly a derivative of the erhu, the rebab, or maybe the other way around. and then the suling, and sometimes vocals as well are tied in with gamelan music, and we'll hear some of that as we start to listen to the music on our CDs. The reason that there is a drum in the gamelan is that the drum is actually the conductor. The drummer is the person who keeps it all together, and that player sits in the very center of the ensemble. We're used in the West to having the conductor be up front, but in a gamelan ensemble, the drummer, who is essentially the conductor who is adjusting the tempo one way or another, is usually right in the center, so there is one drum. Okay. Gamelans came about because the court of the ruler of the country believed that there were mystical powers associated with these instruments and with having a court orchestra. You may remember when we studied Japan, we looked at the Gagaku court orchestra. This culture had court orchestras as well, and they were associated largely with the cardinal directions. Okay? If you look at the pictures of the court, for example, that are on the PowerPoint, you'll see that the buildings are built in right angles to each other. The gamelan is set up the same way, where the instruments are set up in right angles to each other, and you can see a picture of this in your text. Figure 7.3, there's a picture of a gamelan concert. And if you look carefully at it, you can see that the instruments and the players are all at right angles to each other. They don't all sit in rows like we expect in the West. The other interesting thing about this picture, I think, is that if you look in the background, you see people walking around and talking with each other. That would typically not happen at a concert in Europe or the United States. We perceive a concert as being a place where everybody sits and is quiet for a while. Or at least everybody is sitting and focusing on the music to one extent or another. Whether you're at a rock concert or you're at an orchestra concert, your reason for being there is typically to focus on what the music that's being played. Gamelan is not that way. This music is, particularly the loud playing style, is designed for festivals and for parties, and they expect people to talk amongst themselves. This is designed as background music, essentially, for the party that's going on. And that's a major difference, I think, from the West. You're not expected to sit and just listen to the gamelan, and that's not the kind of thing that they expect. The other thing is that there's music that plays for people to be leaving the room, and they won't stop playing until everybody's gone. So that defines how long the piece lasts. But by and large, you could liken it to a jazz trio or quartet playing at somebody's party. You know, the jazz trio sitting there playing The Girl from Ipanema, and everybody's having drinks and talking and everything. You know, you've been in that party before, probably. You may have played that gig. I don't know. But that's the similarity to the gamelan performance is certainly there. Yeah. Okay. So, what is a gamelan? Well, first of all, they believed that the gamelan had certain specific powers, that it assisted in giving the ruler the power that he had by having his building be at right angles to each other, and also by having the gamelan set up the same way. So there were special powers, and so offerings are given, and various kinds of respect are shown. You have a drawing in your text and also in the PowerPoint that shows a drawing of the various instruments. So you can see the hanging gongs that I talked about. You can also see the kettle-type gongs, and they all have specific names in Javanese that I don't expect you to know for the test. Okay, that's the good news, is that you don't need to know what a katuk is or a bonang. Okay, so you're going to be lucky there in terms of memorization of stuff. But just be aware that there are different categories of instruments. There are the hanging gongs, the kettle gongs, which are the bonang and the kanong, and then the metal slab instruments, the slentum, the saran, and the gumbong. They look like vibraphones or xylophones in the picture. Okay. There's the drum. There's a rabab, which is the fiddle, and then there's a couple of sulings, the flutes, in this picture as well. So you've got the whole array of instruments that are in this ensemble out there before you. Here's a formal court gamelan picture, and they're all dressed in ceremonial garb. Okay, and it's quite a formal kind of affair. They take this very seriously. Some close-ups of some of the instruments here. The rabab, the saran and ginder, those are slab instruments, and then the bonang, which is the table full of kettle-like gongs. Gamelans, we talked about the fact that they are played for parties, kind of court official kinds of things. They're also used in another purpose, and that is Javanese shadow puppet plays. And tomorrow we're going to try to do our own Javanese shadow puppet play. We'll see how successful we are. And a lot of universities in the U.S. have a gamelan ensemble. UMKC has one up in Kansas City. The author of your text has a gamelan orchestra at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A lot of schools have invested in this for their multicultural offerings in their music program, and you can play in a gamelan ensemble, and it's great fun. A lot of great interaction that you can have with other musicians in that situation. Now, in your text, you have a diagram on tuning towards the beginning of the chapter. It's transcription 7.1, and if you have your book, you might turn to that and take a look at it. What it does is to give you the pitches of the Western scale and show you where do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and do are up at the top. And then it has the positions of a particular gamelan tuned to both the Javanese pelog and slendro scales. These are the two scales that you need to know about in reference to gamelan music. What I've done on your PowerPoint is to break that down into half-step boxes. So on your PowerPoint, the boxes across the top, there are 12 of them. They each represent the number of cents in an octave. This is a scientific division of the octave that has been done by musicians and scientists in combination with each other to basically make every equal half step equal to 100 cents. Okay, so as you go up the scale, okay, that's the Western 12-tone chromatic scale, and that's what you have on top in your scale comparison diagram. Each one of those is divided by 100 cents. So if you're dealing with a synthesizer, for example, and you want to detune something, you can usually prescribe how many cents up or down you want to detune your synthesizer. And that gives you a lot of control over what the tuning is. Now, what I've done is to take the figure in your book, that transcription, which actually comes from a particular gamelan, because the fact is that every gamelan is going to have a slightly different tuning. They're not all going to be the same. Slendro on one gamelan and slendro on another gamelan will be slightly off. in terms of where these pitches are. So this is a particular gamelan that the author measured, and you can see how far off each one of these pitches is, so that the cents to the next pitch, instead of 100 cents to get to pitch number 1, you have 130, and then 120. And then between 2 and 3, there's 310. And then 110, 100, 170, 260. You can see that some of the gaps there, getting from one note to another on this scale, are unpredictable and slightly larger than you would expect. This instrument is tuned in slendro Javanese. Okay, the one that I just mentioned is the pelog. Now they're easy to remember because one of them has 7 notes and the other one has 5, right? One of them has 7 letters and the other one has 5. And it's not the same. It's reversed. So slendro has 7 letters, it's only got 5 notes. Pelog only has 5 letters in the name, but it's got 7 notes. Okay? So it's the reverse of what you might think, and that's the best way to remember which is which. Now, as you listen again to this instrument, this suling, I want you to listen for how far it is between pitches 1 and 2. Here's 1. $230 to get from here to here. To get from pitches 2 to 3, it was 240 cents. And then to the next one is 250. And so they're all slightly off. And if you tried to compare this to a piano, you're sort of close to a C sharp, sort of close to a D sharp there, okay? But these on the piano are 200 cents apart. And 1 to 2 is 230 cents in the slendro scale. So you can tell that there's a little bit more distance. It's not either one of those. It's halfway in between, okay? So therefore, that 240 cents that it takes to get to this next pitch makes it sound like it's out of tune. We can only approximate it on the piano. We can't really do it justice because, as you can see from this chart, there's a larger number of cents in between these notes than we can actually accommodate on a piano. And so that's why it falls so far outside the Western sense of things. Now, do you remember back to the Native American flute, the R. Carlos Nakai performance that we heard that was out of tune with the synthesizer at certain places? Out of tune, okay? Now you understand, seeing this diagram here, you understand why it was. Because the Native American flute has the same kinds of non-Western sounds to it that the Javanese suling does. And this chart here shows you the math behind why this is different. Does everybody understand this principle in terms of the number of cents in an octave and the difference between these slendro and pelog scales compared to the 12-tone? Yes?
It's like, there's no full, never mind, I got it.
Right. They leave out the 4th scale degree in slendro because it's already gone too far to be called 4 anymore.
Okay.
So they leave that out. So that's why they...
Calling it 5 notes on like this?
That's right. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Yeah, it's not a mistake. They leave out 4 because the number of cents has already been so high to push that note up to the level of 5. And you can see that it corresponds more with 5 on the pelog scale when it gets up to that point. Yes?
Also, it's kind of interesting because like the one note that seems similar in all of them are like the sol, the 5th note seems
Right.
almost exactly the same in both.
Yeah.
all three
Uh-huh.
scales.
So 5 gets pretty close, and for example, the G in the 12-tone scale, yeah, is pretty close. The so is
Such a strong interval in our culture too.
yeah. And remember the sa and pa in India, the fifth interval there.
Fifth interval seems to be prevalent in a lot of cultures that we've studied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just because it's tonally strong.
Yeah, it's important to understand, though, that having to do with this perfect fifth idea, that there is a difference between a Pythagorean fifth and an equal-tempered fifth. Yeah, Pythagorean fifth is actually quite a little bit larger. And if you look at the fifth here in Slendro, it's larger than the fifth that in the 12-tone system, and so is Pythagorean. So what you might be dealing with is more of a Pythagorean fifth here in Slendro. That would be a good thing to study. Yes?
On the Palog scale, on the 7th step, that 260, is that to go to the next octave, 260?
Yes. That's between 7 and 1.
7 and 1.
Yeah.
So
To
it's
get
almost like 2 steps.
more than 2 steps. Yeah, certainly more than 2 half steps in the 12-tone system to get from 7 to 1. You can hear that same distance between 6 and 1 here on this Slendro instrument. It's a larger interval than just 2 half steps, or just a full whole step in the 12-tone system. Yeah, very interesting study, the whole tuning thing, because we've only been stuck with this 12-tone equal-tempered tuning for about the last 400 years. Before that, we in the West we did Pythagorean and another tuning called mean tone. It's a fascinating study that we don't really have time to delve into in this course, but the main thing I want you to know here is why this music sounds the way it does to us. When you hear gamelan music, and we're going to hear some in just a few minutes, when you hear gamelan music, you're first struck by the fact that these instruments don't sound in tune. To our ears, there is an out-of-tune kind of sound to it, but that's just because of the non-Western scales that they're dealing with. Another thing that's important to understand about gamelan tuning is that these 2 scales, Palog and Slendro, are not used simultaneously. Okay? There will never be a composition in which both scales are being played at the same time. Now, in some cases, you have to have a completely different ensemble to play in Slendro than in Palog. Or in some cases, the same ensemble will have certain instruments that are tuned one way and certain that are tuned the other. So they can switch from a Slendro to a Palog piece by switching instruments within the ensemble. But it's a different tuning. And so you actually have to have different instruments to play in the 2 different scale forms. Okay, and we talked about the fact that they are at right angles to each other from the cardinal directions. So it'll always be pointing north, south, east, west. They're very specific about where it's going. Any card players in here? Have you ever determined whether you're going to have luck at cards depending on whether you were sitting with the same direction as the bathtub in the house where you were playing? You ever do that? Okay, my mother did that. If she was having bad luck at cards, she played bridge. And if she was having bad luck, she would say, wait a minute, are we sitting parallel to the bathtub in this house? And that's the kind of superstitious kind of thing that people carry with them in unconscious kinds of ways. The sense of having things be lined up north, south, or east, west is very important to the Javanese culture, not only with the direction that the buildings are built, but also the way the gamelan is set up. Yes?
So in these gamelans, will certain instruments always set
Yes.
just that direction?
Right. Has to be that way. Yeah. I know a piano player around here that has to have the keyboard of the piano lined up with the boards on the recital hall stage.
Wow.
Some of you might know that person too. Okay? So there are certain, certain idiosyncrasies about musicians in performance that are that way because of the way that they like to perform. Now, there are two types of playing within both cultures and within the different scale forms, and that is loud and soft. And they have two different functions, as you can see on the PowerPoint and read in your text. The loud playing style tends to be more for ceremonial outdoor processions and parties, that kind of thing. Indoor tends to be more the soft playing style. And there will be different instruments associated with each one. The gongs and the slab instruments will generally play in both the loud and the soft style. They'll just play louder or softer. But the instruments that you won't get in the louder playing style are the suling, the flutes, the rhubarb, the fiddle, and the vocals. Okay, those will happen only with the soft playing style. And you have examples of both on your CDs. So let's get to the music. Now that we've really talked about the principle behind gamelan and the construction of the scales and all of that, let's actually get to a little bit of the music while we still have some time in this session. The first example on your CDs, Bubaran Kembang Kapar, is in the loud playing style, and it's an actual recording from the field. Okay, this was actually recorded in Yogyakarta by the author. And this is the kind of thing that you would hear being played at a festival. What strikes you about this music? What's your first reaction to hearing this music? Yes?
It sounds almost really surreal.
Uh-huh.
Like it's there, but it's not. It's more. It almost
Yeah.
sounds more
Surreal, like
more
it's...
like it's an ambience rather than actual music.
Okay. Like it's almost like an ambient sound, like a soundscape,
Yeah.
rather than an actual piece of music.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting since it's designed to be played with people talking and having a party over the top of it, right? Yeah, that's an interesting thought. In your book, you'll find a cipher notation that shows you where the various instruments play. And if you take a look at that just briefly, you'll find transcription 7.3, which describes stress levels in the punctuation pattern of this music. Now, I'm going to end class today by playing you the demonstration piece on your CDs. Okay, it's a demonstration piece that the students at the Gamelan ensemble at University of Wisconsin did. And what I want you to do is to, those of you that know how to conduct, start conducting and show me where 1 is. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. As you conduct along with this, that certainly is where our Western ears perceive 1 being, is when the big gongs come in. We perceive that as 1. Okay, here's the problem. It's not 1. The gongs hit on 4. And finally, and at the end of 16 notes, the 16th note is the most important one, where everything comes together and all the instruments hit at once, and the big gongs hit on beat 16. That's the most important beat of the whole phrase. So you have to turn around your whole system of where the accent should be, where the punctuation of a measure should be, from your Western sense of 1 and 3 being the strong beats to 4 being the strongest beat and 16 being the strongest one of all in the 4-beat pattern. So take some time, listen to this music in that context, and compare it to the cipher notation that you see in this example in your text, and we will get back to this music in our next class.